Did I ever tell you about the story about how my mom broke the spatula over my brother's wrist? The wooden.
No.
I didn't tell you that.
No.
Story? Yeah, she was going after Jared with a wooden spatula, and she raised it to hit him. I guess she was aiming for his face, and he put his wrist up to block it, and she hit his wrist, and it shattered. So from then on, it was she bought metal ones. That's a true story.
And then still hit y'all?
Yes.
So I remember one time we were watching, I don't know if it was a YouTube video or something, but it was an NFL football player who was on top of, like he took it's a Bozu ball, is that what it's called?
You're talking about Alvin Kamara.
Alvin Kamara. Who dat? So it was a Bosu ball, is that what it's called?
Yes.
The thing, it's like a half sphere. And he flipped it over onto the rounded part, and he was on top, and he was, all wobbly.
Actually, I think he was on a fully spherical exercise ball. It wasn't a half ball.
Fully spherical, my bad. And he was standing on top of it, and what were they having him do?
I think he was just catching different objects.
That were being, tossed at him.
Maybe it was a medicine ball that was weighted that he had to catch and still be stable on top of the ball.
And I remember Josh asked his younger brother, he said, do you think, what was your question? I think to Corbett. It was something about, do you think Kamara can do that exercise? Do you think that exercise strengthens him, or do you think he can do that because he's already strong or something like that? Do you remember that?
Yes.
And so it was just kind of this interesting take on, stability or stabilizing exercises, and then being strong and being able to stabilize in different positions because you're strong, or because you strength train and things like that. Do you have any thoughts? Excuse me.
So you're asking me, was he able to do that circus trick because he was strong?
Already strong?
Or did that circus trick make him
strong?
Well, just like I've been telling you, strength is...
specific.
Okay. So, therefore, if you're asking me if he got good at the circus trick, which him standing on the big ball, I think he got better at doing it because he practiced it. But, like I was telling you earlier, you have to have certain abilities in order to practice a skill. It's like, for instance, some people who are very, very weak, they have a hard enough time balancing just on the ground, much less on an unstable surface, right? It's not so much that they have a lack of balance that's there, but it's mostly because they're just not strong enough to produce the prerequisite force to be able to hold themselves upright. They're just understrong. Like somebody who's really weak probably can't run because they can't produce the prerequisite force to actually launch them and suspend themselves in air, and then land back down on the ground and do it again. They have to walk. They're just not strong enough yet. So they have to have a prerequisite amount of force production, strength, to be able to actually do this skill, which is running or doing the circus act on this big spherical round ball.
I liked the example you gave of your grandmother, or most of our grandmothers probably wouldn't be able to run because, probably most of our grandparents have gotten weak, and hopefully not, but I know my grandmother couldn't have run. So I thought that was a good example.
Yeah, you just got to get strong enough first before you can actually do this movement, which is running. Mm-hmm. And now to get strong, there's many different ways to do that. It's just meeting the principles of being specific enough to have an adaptation, and then also loading the tissue enough to where they have to adapt to being able to produce more force. The range of motion matters. There's a lot of things. Volume matters, so on and so forth. Your nutrition matters. All
Your
that.
sleep.
Correct. But going back to Alvin Kamara on this, doing the circus trick, Yeah, I would say he did have to get strong before he actually could do that thing. Now he's probably always that strong by the time he
Right.
got to age 5, just because he developed as a human. But he also is a genetic freak. He was already really strong. He's stronger than 99% of other humans, and it's proven because he is an NFL running back. Not only that, he's like one of the better NFL running backs, which makes him even more elite. So therefore, I would say he probably is good at that for 2 reasons. One, he had the already prerequisite strength to do it, and number two, he's probably practiced that skill and has a lot of other unique genetic and or practice things, like he's already really good at adapting to certain skills. He's already really good at recovering. He's already really good at adapting. He's already really good with hand-eye, foot-eye coordination, if you want to call it that, right? Better than most people. And so he was able to get good at it and better than most other people and to a higher skill level
Yeah.
than most other people would have. And so to make it as simple as, oh,
If you want to get run better like Kamara, you should do this circus
yeah,
trick.
if somebody tells you that if you want to be an NFL running back, you need to do this thing, no. Because here's the thing: some other NFL running backs might not be able to do that, but they're NFL running backs. And at the same token, there may be some people who could do that, but could not be NFL running
Right,
backs.
like circus performers.
Yeah,
Though
it's
some
just
of them might be
silliness.
able to be running backs, but yeah. And then I've heard you talk about high responders and low responders. Would that be the inverse? You've talked about like high responders, so like people who can respond really quickly to a new stimulus, and I'm assuming that would be like Kamara, who's probably gonna, when you throw something new at him to try, it probably doesn't take him long to pick it up. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Excuse me. Another thing we were talking about with strength being specific is we were talking about in order to progress in a specific movement or to get stronger in a specific movement, you have to see it often enough. So Josh, could you talk to us about that principle?
In order to get
Like, so you were saying you can't just have constantly varied movement where you never see the same movement twice. You have to, over, a short period of time, consistently see certain movements in order to improve in them.
So the principle is SAID, S-A-I-D, specific adaptations to impose demands. And an easy way to understand this is getting a suntan. So if you want to get a suntan, it's pretty obvious what you have to do. You have to go outside in the sun. Or, tanning booths can replicate this stimulus, but the analogy is still the same. I have to go outside and get exposure to this thing that actually changes my whatever the chemical processes are on your skin, or whatever biological happenings go on to have the skin turn into a darker shade. And so in order for me to do that, I have to continually expose myself to that stimulus. Now, there are a few things that you could do that would hinder this, which is, one, you overexpose yourself.
That's me.
You never go out. Yeah, the other thing we have to talk about is people's predisposition to adapt, or the response they have to these things. Like, for instance, Erica, she's fair-skinned, so she's going to have a harder time getting more tan compared to others.
But an easier time burning.
Correct. So yeah, we'll get back to that in a second, but let's talk about the basic principle. So
Excuse me.
you go outside, you get exposed to the sun. If you overexpose yourself, you could burn. If you underexpose yourself, nothing will happen, right? Like going out in the sun for 2 seconds, nothing's probably going to happen. Whereas if you go out for the appropriate amount of time where you do enough not to get burned and overdo it, but also not too little to where nothing will happen, say like, I'm just going to make a random number. I'm not saying this is actually true. 10 to 30 minutes, okay? Let's say you can handle that much. You go out there, 10 to 30 minutes, you come back inside, you're not going to be tan because you only did it once. You got to do it over and over, say for like weeks, months. Now, here's the deal. After you start getting some initial gains or tanness, if you will, eventually you will hit a ceiling if you consistently go out into the sun with the same exposure rate, meaning like the sun is exposed the same amount every time, and you're always going out, let's just say 20 minutes every day, you will only reach a certain level of tan. In order to get more and more tan, you would have to go out for what?
More time.
Longer periods of time, or have more intense exposure to the sun.
So go closer to the equator.
Correct. Which is why they're tan.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so you'd have to actually increase your dose, if you will, increase your exposure to the sun to continually get more and more and more and more. This applies to training. It's the exact same principle. Did I answer your question? What was the question originally?
It was about consistently being exposed to the same exercise movement so that you can get stronger.
Oh, but you also were
and get better
talking
at
about
it.
can you just have completely random training all the
Right,
time? So
right.
yeah, so let's now take the analogy of the suntan over into training. So if somebody said, "Hey, I just want to be completely random with my workouts. I want to do something different every day, different reps, different exercise selection, different time domains, different intensities, so on and so forth." I mean, you could literally infinitely vary your training. And they ask me, "Will I get better?" I will tell them, if you are completely brand new and have never done anything ever before, any exposure to anything that is physical activity is going to get you some amount of gain. Okay, let's go back to the suntan analogy. So if I were to go out into the sun and I had never been in the sun before, it is going to take very little time and or exposure to the sun to get me just that little bit extra tan because I'm so sensitive because I've never done anything before. I've never gone in the sun ever, and so that little bit of sun is going to affect me. Now, at the same token, I also probably don't have a high tolerance for the sun, so I can't stay out very long, right? And so it's a little bit of a two-edged sword. But, and again, I also want to make this point, is that your genetics factor in here too, right? Your ability to just adapt at all. Like some people who go out into the sun can handle a whole ton of sun, and or they don't have to have a whole ton of sun to get an adaptation, whereas Eric is different. Too much comes really quickly for her. And also, she needs a lot of it to actually get really tan. Yes. So she's got to be even more diligent about making sure she's monitoring how much and how often. Now, back to the training analogy. So if I'm going into the gym and I do completely random stuff, but I'd never done anything before, so I'm increasing my activity level a little bit, I'm going to get gains. I'm going to get my gains in cardiovascular and aerobic ability, and I'm going to get stronger, and I'm going to get better at doing the movement just because I've never done physical activity before. But those gains will run out really quickly. The ceiling will come much sooner, because if she wants to actually get better and better and better and better than just a beginner stimulus, she would have to get more and more and more and more specific and more and more and more and more exposure to the things she wants to get better at, just like getting a tan. So for instance, let's say she was doing all kinds of different things. Like she was doing a spin class one day, and the next day she was doing CrossFit, and the next day she was doing powerlifting, and the next day she was doing gymnastics, and this was all in like a 7-day stretch, right? She can get better at all of it at first, but then after a few months, maybe like even close to a year, she's starting to see like, man, I'm not improving anymore. Everything's kind of like plateaued. Well, what she would have to do is, well, man, okay, I really noticed that I'm lacking most in this thing. Let's just say it's her endurance. It's like, I'm getting pretty strong. I feel like I'm continually getting stronger, and I'm getting better at the skill of the movement. But man, like I get out of breath so fast, and I can't do a lot of this thing. So what does she do? She's like, okay, well, I'm going to focus on that one thing. Bingo. Once she starts focusing and getting more specific, then she can start see that plateau go away and start increasing and gaining again, right? Now, obviously, once I get more specific with one thing, the other things that get neglected could potentially start to wane, because I'm just not exposing myself to that anymore, right? She's no longer going out in the sun and exposing herself to that particular stimulus, if you will, with the analogy. Whereas she is exposing herself to this other skill, this other ability that she wants to improve, and so because she's exposing herself to that, she will get better and better and better. So, to answer your question specifically, does doing completely random workouts work? It depends. Is the person completely brand new and have never done anything before? If so, anything will work. If you go ride your bike, your bench press will go up. Right? Because you just never done anything before, right? You're doing something other than nothing. Whereas, like, if I literally took a real world example, like Erica, for instance, she's been training for a long time, like since she was a teenager. And so if she wanted to get better at bench press, riding a bike will not help her.
No.
She needs to do more bench press or something like a bench press. I'm just randomly picking these movements, by the way. I'm just trying to make it a ridiculous example because biking and bench pressing are about as far away from each other on the scale of specificity as you can possibly get.
Awesome. That wraps it up for me.
No! I want to talk now.
Oh, okay. Awesome. What's the time frame that I need to follow in order to be intermittently fasting?
Well, she's asking this question on purpose, guys.
It's hard for me to think on my feet of things that like we haven't talked about.
If you are going through a stretch of time without eating, you are fasting. Intermittently. Intermittent just means like something like intervals. You have a period of time where you're eating and a period of time when you're not eating. So technically, if I took a bite of an apple, chewed it, swallowed it, and about 5 seconds later, I want to take another bite of my apple, and I took a bite, I'm intermittently fasting for 5 seconds. Did I say 5 seconds? 5 seconds. You see my point here? I think what most people would associate with intermittent fasting, all jokes aside, is they have really long stretches of time that they don't eat. Some people it's 12 hours. Some people it's 16, which is the most popular one, by the way. Some people it's 24 hours, 72 hours. There's all different kinds of applications. Here's the deal. What it is exposing you to is changes in meal timing. That's the basic principle. Intermittent fasting is one iteration or one fad of meal timing, right? Meal timing just means when I am having my meals, the time of which I'm having my meals, and the time between them, right? And so technically, again, everybody intermittently fasts, unless you are constantly eating all the time. And I don't recommend that. So, intermittent fast away. Now, benefits of intermittent fasting over others, based off of what I found from experts who study this stuff all the time, there's some data out there that some people have probably jumped on a little more firm than I would. And what I mean by that is they think, oh, there are some benefits because they might have some clues in their research, but I don't think it's strong enough evidence to say that it absolutely has some bigger benefit than other dietary protocols, right? Some people that, honestly, more people than not, I've seen saying that intermittent fasting doesn't do anything special compared to other diets. And the people that claim that the research is saying that there's this huge benefit to intermittent fasting, again, they're probably taking the data in these research articles and giving them too much credit right now. I'm not saying that in the future, when we do more and more research and get better and better at it and start taking away the biases and the efficacy of the research data that we collect, we may get some better answers, and it may show that intermittent fasting is the best thing to do ever. But right now, I just don't think the evidence is there. And actually, the evidence is in reverse to that. It's saying that it's not anything special. Okay? So that's where I'm holding right now until my mind is changed maybe later when I get better evidence. But here's what you need to understand is that calorie balance is the most important factor. Okay? I'll give you an example. Let's say you're intermittent fasting. The most popular one is an 8-hour window of eating, which means 16 hours of the day you're fasting, and you have an 8-hour window of which you get to eat food. When you do that, there's no difference if another person who eats like 3 to 4 meals a day spread out over let's say like a 14-hour window and eats the same amount of calories, okay? They also burn the same amount of calories, do the same amount of physical activity, and have the same genetic code, all that stuff. Let's say they're perfectly equal in every other aspect. Their calories stay the same. Their calories are the same that they consume. They just eat them at a different time and have different lengths of fasting between their meals. and their consumption of the food, there would literally be no difference. Well, I shouldn't say literally. I shouldn't say I absolutely know, but in theory, there really is going to be no difference because they ate the same amount and they burned the same amount. So technically, nothing different will happen. Okay? And so again, the reason why I brought that up is because it's the meal timing part is not the most important thing in regards to body composition. It's going to be the amount of calories you consume. The second most important thing is going to be the balance of those calories, the amount of protein, carbohydrates, and fat, and all the micronutrients that go along with those things. And then after that, those main two things make up the majority of what matters. But after that, things like meal timing, food quality, supplementation, and things like that, some other few things maybe, matter much less than those first two more important things. Here's where I think intermittent fasting has some benefit, is that it actually helps people adhere to a diet. That's pretty much what I think is the best benefit of it. I think also people, it fits in their, did I say fits in their lifestyle yet? Mm-mm. It fits into their lifestyle, which means they don't have more than 8 hours to eat, and they enjoy that 8-hour window throughout their day of fasting. Like, oh, I get that 8-hour window and I get to eat this much food and then I'll be done, right? People like that, and it helps them adhere. It kind of fits their life.
It's kind of like a reward system.
The other thing is that I think it also helps people when they know I can't eat past this time. And so when they get done eating in that, let's say again, the example I used, 8-hour window, if they get hungry again beyond that, they're expecting it because socially they've learned, oh, when I intermittent fast, I'm going to be hungry when I don't eat. And so I'm just going to have to deal with it. Whereas before, if they weren't intermittent fasting, they would say, oh, I'm going to eat some more. And there they go. They'd now consumed more than they would if they were intermittent fasting. Not because intermittent fasting is anything special compared to other diets, it's just because they restricted themselves from eating because they made a rule, I can't eat past this time. Whereas before, they would have eaten because they were hungry.
I remember, I think it was like Oprah or some other like TV personality, and she said, I don't eat past 8 p.m. I don't eat, and I've lost so much weight because I don't eat past 8 p.m. And I remember thinking, well, what do most people eat past 8 p.m.? I was like, I know what I'm eating after 8 p.m. I'm eating cookies.
Yeah, I think,
and I'm drinking a big glass of milk.
Yep, I think that's a big myth when people say, oh, when you eat past a certain amount of time, it doesn't digest.
Right.
So I can get that in the camera. It doesn't digest because I'm sleeping, which makes no sense because when you sleep, you're still going through biological, metabolic processes, which requires energy for you to use. And if your body stopped digesting things, I think that would become problematic. I think your body's always digesting things if it has anything to digest.
Right. I want to strengthen my abdominal muscles. And everyone tells me I have a weak core. What am I supposed to do to strengthen my core?
There's a lot of things you can do.
Okay.
I would ask you, why do you want to strengthen your core?
Well, I've been having back pain, and people tell me that because I have a weak core, I'm having back pain.
Okay. That's I shouldn't say untrue because this is like a made-up example. And if real world people were to ask me, like, hey, I have back pain because my core is weak, I would say that's a reductionist view of why you have pain.
So should I focus on trying to strengthen my core at all? Like, should that be a focus of my training? Should I do specific core exercises?
Well, that depends. What's your goal?
My goal is just to be generally physically prepared.
Okay. Then if you want to be generally physically prepared, then I would expose yourself to a bunch of different movement patterns, of which will require you to use your core. You doing movement patterns for your specific goal, you'd want them to be able to carry over as much as possible to whatever it is that you're trying to get better at. In your situation, you said generally prepared. I want to be generally fit in order to do my daily tasks. Well, the next question I have to ask you is multiple questions. One, what do you enjoy doing? How much time do you have? What equipment do you have available to you? All those things are going to come into play when I'm going to actually recommend something to you. Okay, so for instance, if you say, well, I don't have any equipment whatsoever, and I don't have enough money for a gym membership. I only have like an hour a week, which means if I'm going to do 3 days a week and I only have an hour, that's only 20 minutes a day. I would first off tell you that's not a lot of time, and so we're going to do the best we can, but you're probably not going to see the most results you possibly could because you don't have that much time to give, but that's okay because we're doing more than were doing previously. You're going to see some benefit, okay? The next thing is you only have body weight to work with. Okay, cool. Well, what options do we have with body weight? You have these options. You have something like gymnastics. You have something like calisthenics. You have something like yoga or stuff that just use your body weight for exercise. Which ones are going to get your goal achieved the best and quickest way and most time efficient way? Because 20 minutes is not a lot of time. We'd have to choose which one of those options is best. And then after we choose which option is best, we have to actually have you buy into it. If you don't actually want to do it, then that's not a good option, because if you don't do it, it doesn't matter if it's the best option because it's not going to work because you're not doing it.
Right.
So you figure out what you're going to do. So see what I'm saying? It's complex. It just depends on the person what I would give them based off of the two things you told me, which was I want to be generally fit and also want a strong core.
Mm-hmm. So like I'm doing bench press, overhead press, squats, deadlifts. I'm doing a lot of like power. Excuse me, like powerlifting. Excuse me, movements. Do I need to add in like
some of those moves are not powerlifting?
I know the overhead press isn't powerlifting. I'm using barbells to do resistance training, heavy resistance training. Do I need to add in core exercises?
What are core exercises?
Anything that uses my abdominal.
Yeah, well, all those
muscles?
all those powerlifting exercises were using your abdominal muscles. That's what you're trying to get me to say, wasn't it?
I think that's an interesting point that not a lot of people think about. Not a lot of. I think one of the most illustrative ways that you've described it was, have you ever put how much weight? I don't know. For me, take me. I don't squat 200 pounds. Okay, no. And so if I put 200 pounds on the barbell and I took it off the rack and I just stood there, I would feel my core working. And I was just like, I know what that feels like because I've had a heavy barbell on my back. And it certainly engages all those muscles that we think of as the core. And so I just, excuse me, I thought that was illuminating. And I don't think many people think about it that way.
If somebody really asked me or told me one of their goals was to get their core stronger, I would tell them that they would need to think about which I would ask them how is your core being challenged mostly in your day? Because that's the movement you need to be most prepared for, and your core needs to be able to function in those movement patterns and those tasks the best in order to be prepared to be ready, right? Let's say, for instance, that you're a mom and you have to pick up your kids off the ground all the time, right? And you feel like your core is not strong enough to do that. Well, then what you would need to do to get your core stronger is to do that thing.
So
and your core will adapt to being strong enough and prepared to pick up your kids because you're doing a pattern that is specific to that thing you're asked to do in your day, which is pick up your kids.
And then as like a secondary movement, I would go do my deadlifts in the gym because it's a similar movement pattern.
Are you asking me or telling me?
Yeah, I'm asking.
Are you asking me if you would do a deadlift as a secondary movement?
Because you're saying my primary movement is picking up my kids.
No, I said the primary movement is a movement that looks like picking up your kids.
Okay.
So yes, but picking up your kids is going to be the thing you're going to want to get better at. So you want to practice picking up your kids, right? But the thing is, your kids, you can't like continually add weight to your kids to get strong.
Although they
because you
are
will need to do that
growing.
to get stronger. You have to add weight. And so what I would recommend is using a piece of equipment that you can progressively load heavier and heavier and do more and more volume with over time, so that you can stimulate your body to adapt and to get stronger and stronger.
Right.
So that when you go pick up your kids, it's light now.
Right. It's like if you only ever pick up your kids.
Your core is going to be working in that movement pattern that it did get stronger in over time because you trained it. And so now I'll be more prepared to pick up your
Right.
kids.
Right.
Because your core is not just this one system that works outside of all the other musculature in your body. It is a body of muscles that connects with your other musculature and your bones and your connective tissue and your nerves and your brain and all that, and they all function together. So if you wanted to get that core strong, it needs to be within a specific context, right? If you were just trying to get bigger abdominal muscles, then that's a little bit of a different story, because you could do something like just a deadlift to get your abdominal muscles bigger and stronger, but at some point you would need to add more volume and more stress to that area to get the muscles to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so you might want to add other accessory movements that aren't just a deadlift, say like dedicated abdominal exercises. I put air quotes in there, so that you can add more stress without having to do deadlifts all the time, because deadlifts are very high stress because you can do a
Right.
lot of weight with them, right? Well, I do something that's a little bit more tolerable, so I can add even more volume without overstressing myself, because it's a little bit more manageable, because it's not as fatiguing as a whole as my body as a whole. And so it may behoove that person to add some specific abdominal exercises to get a little bit extra work with those particular muscles to get them to grow. That's a whole different conversation. It depends on if the person's goal is to get stronger or their core stronger, or to actually grow their abdominal muscles so that you can see them more. That's a little bit different goal.
Right. Yeah, one's more functional and one's more like
Yep.
aesthetic.
And some people may be able to see their abdominal muscles without having to do any abdominal exercises, because they have low enough body fat on their body, amount of body fat on their body, and they just genetically look a certain way. Their body's just going to predispose to expressing itself like this. Whereas other people may have to work a little harder. They may have to do a little bit more dedicated, specific abdominal exercises so that those muscles will grow a little bit bigger, and so on and so forth. So it just depends person to person and whatever the goal is.